Welcome, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Derek. I'm Matthew Holt, President and CEO of U.S. Integrity. We run the largest conflict-free integrity services in the country. We work with most of the professional and collegiate sports leagues, like the NBA, Power 5 conferences, like the Pac-12, the Big 12, the SEC. We work with many of the regulated operators in those states, and almost every regulator in states that offer regulated sports betting. Today's panel is about the sports betting audiences and growing the sports betting audience, expanding the sports betting audience. We have first to my left, Baird Fogle, partner at Morgan Lewis. Brad worked on the AAF deal, works with the Oakland Raiders, worked on the Verizon, Yahoo, MGM deals, so he's very familiar with sports betting teams, leagues, these type of deals. Next to him, we have Jacob Oberman, the Senior Vice President at Rush Street Gaming. Jacob's responsible for both brick and mortar and mobile operations for Rush Street Gaming, as well as mobile casino. And then to my far left, we have Adam Candee, the Managing Director at Legal Sports Report. And Adam also is a host here at VSiN 3 nights a week. So I think we have a really good panel to discuss the topic, which is growing your audience in sports betting and in the regulated sports betting space. And I guess we'll start with the fact that, with sports betting having such minimal and thin margins, basically you're operating on a 4.54% theoretical hold percentage. It's really important that we have the right targeted promotions, we're doing the right thing. So I would ask you guys, and I'll start with Baird, who is that target audience for sports betting? What is that right individual, whether it's male, female, age demographics, financial demographics, and is that demographic rapidly changing as the regulated sports betting landscape in the United States changes?
Yeah, well, as everyone in this room knows, right now the target, I guess, is 25 to 44-year-old white males. Those are the people that comprise most of the bettors in the United States, but a lot of people are surprised to find out that 4 out of every 10 bettors is female. It's changing, it's rapidly changing, and with the growth of sports betting now in the United States, the new target audience is anybody with a smartphone or a tablet. And that means millennials, which excites, I think, everybody in this room. There are a lot of folks that are just now warming up to sports betting and sports in general, that previously didn't have the access that they can have now.
And would you guys want to add anything down there? Jacob, you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think that answer probably hit on most of the points. The only thing I would add is, in the UK, people start learning how to bet when they're learning how to drink milk. So in the U.S., the market's still at its infancy, and there's just so much room for growth.
No, to add to the point about anybody with a smartphone, I think you can look at the first 18 months and what we've seen throughout the country, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, markets that are just getting started that are already at 85% mobile share, and only going to see that trend continue in states that adopt industry-friendly mobile regulations.
And considering the fact, like Baird said, that 4 out of 10 bettors are now women, and we're seeing the growth in women's popularity of women's sports as well. We see a tremendous amount of women's softball betting that we monitored this year as soon as March Madness ends, women's college basketball and offering the entire tournament, WNBA. Is women the largest potential growth segment in sports betting right now as a target audience, or is it somewhere else? Is it millennials? Is it female bettors? What do you think it is? You want to start, Jacob, as the operator?
Yeah, I think the core market still your 25 to 40-year-old male with a smartphone. I think that's the core market, and there's still tremendous amounts of growth ahead in that market. But to your point, there's some unique sports out there that maybe aren't the top 4 ball sports in the U.S., but that are incredibly popular with bettors that might cater to new audiences. And I'll give you an example, like tennis is something that's really becoming very popular to bet on, just given the volume of matches there are and the volume of opportunities to bet. So things like that are really opening up new markets as well.
Yeah, to that end, I think I would add golf to the list of sports, especially with the in-play opportunity. When we talk about live betting and the robust amount of data that's available when it comes to betting on golf, and the fact that golf is a sport that also will attract some different demographics.
And sports betting is changing the way television produces sports as well, which is now more interesting to women and millennials who watch sports differently than maybe you and I do and are interested in different things. When I was working with the Alliance of American Football, one of the things they were working on was increasing the amount of pixels so that literally while you were watching a game on your tablet or your phone, you could select one player that the camera would constantly follow for you. So even after Patrick Mahomes throws a touchdown, you can watch him run off the field, go to the medical tent, talk to the fans, whatever. And it's changing so that now women and millennials are being drawn more and more into sports and sports watching.
So we see with a lot of the professional and collegiate sports leagues, so many of these great deals are being cut, but also some of the leagues are also taking varying stances. We see some of the collegiate leagues asking some of these states to put prohibitions on such thing as player props or prohibitions on some things such as 1v1 collegiate sports, such as tennis or anything that you're only, track and field where one individual can actually fix the match and rather than a team sport. Do any of the league stances on any any of these policies or procedures change the way that you all operate? You want to start, Jacob?
Yeah. So I mean, look. I mean, I think the as it relates to the collegiate question. I mean, we've had betting here in Nevada on UNLV games for a long time. I think as we go out to other states, I think certainly there's an opportunity to educate that bringing collegiate betting out in not prohibiting betting on the in-state teams is actually a way to bring the data into the open market and allow an opportunity for operators to work with regulators to ensure that there's integrity with collegiate games. And that's sort of one idea that I think is important.
Well, I think that one of the great things, and we have some folks in here from professional teams today, but one of the great things that the professional team's done has embraced the data. And, we work with so many collegiate conferences and teams at U.S. Integrity, and what we tell them all the time is you're going to get the same level of monitoring on those collegiate sports. The operators are going to be watching who's betting the collegiate games. We're going to look into who placed each bet, whether the bet was suspicious. So I actually think from an integrity standpoint, it's fine. What I'm wondering is, if a league is saying, hey, we Purdue says we're not allowed to let any Purdue people bet from the collegiate, from anywhere, any position in the college. Do any of these stances from leagues, teams, individual universities affect the way that you target your customers? If you were in Indiana right now, anyone who's basically at the University of Purdue isn't allowed to wager or they would lose their position. And does that affect how you do your marketing and promotions in individual states?
Well, and the other thing that we're not talking about right now that's going to impact all of that is the fact that the NCAA is now lessening its stance on whether or not an athlete can be compensated, a student athlete can be compensated for their likeness. So the real battle, I think, is going to be around data, because there are a lot of legal arguments out there that state not only does the school own the data, but the data being produced is also owned by the athlete actually producing the data. So at what point do we start to worry about integrity there when an athlete can literally be compensated for the data they're producing, sure, not just their likeness being used on the cover of a EA Sports or a video game?
Absolutely. You got anything?
I think it's important to understand, while I certainly don't represent an operator's perspective, we do at Legal Sports Report keep a pretty close eye on how these things are being regulated in different states, and I think it's important to understand that there is a wide range of approaches right now to how this is being done. I mean, there are some states that have basically said we're going to set up a minimal licensing structure and put it under an existing regulatory body, and we go from there. There are others that have set up much more robust checks. You talked about the NCAA and prohibition. Some prohibit on in-state betting, some prohibit on all collegiate prop betting. So it's important to understand that there's a variety in terms of how this is being done, and it is largely being done on the basis of what feels good. There is not a lot of evidence to the point of that banning in-game or in-state betting is going to significantly reduce the risk of there being some sort of situation that violates the integrity of betting at the NCAA level.
I mean, all but 8 states either have approved legislation or have legislation cooking right now to take advantage of this. And of course, California is leading the way on the NCAA charge, already making it legal in that state in 2023 for somebody to be compensated for their likeness. Data's next.
I agree with the data point exactly. One of the interesting things that we kind of kicked it off with when talking about the audience for sports betting was, the thin margins, that theoretical 4.54% hold percentage that operators work on, and then how do you target your audience? And, we've seen some people like Circa in town run a great contest this year. People wondered how a second NFL contest would do. They got almost 2,000 entries at $1,000 a piece. That's people coming into their property each and every week. We've seen some of the cash back promotions work really well with what William Hill's doing. What do you guys think is the best advertising that you can do right now to attract new players? Is it contests? Is it spending hard advertising dollars, or is it promotions? Let's start with you, Jacob.
I think the answer is it's dynamic. You really want to do a whole lot of things. There's so many channels. There's linear, there's digital. We've had a big contest in Pennsylvania that's done fantastically well. So I think it's just a variety of things. There's no one secret bullet.
No, I think what you've seen, whether it's your shop or others, is that the drive for customer acquisition right now has taken many different forms, and that has really been the story of the first year of legal sports betting, has been aggressive promotions. I think you can use New Jersey as a great test case and see how different operators have gone about trying to acquire customers, whether it's through the use of marketing in terms of promotions, or whether it's hard advertising when you look at the New Jersey market in terms of transit and trying to get people from New York in as well.
Anything else, Baird?
Yeah, I mean, they're absolutely right. But one of the great ways to do it is by expanding exactly where you can get people, and that's why the Verizon Yahoo Sports deal was so critical with MGM Roar, because you've opened up one of the largest fantasy platforms on earth to sports gaming and getting people more in tune and more knowledgeable. And someone sees now a link where they can actually do something that they've never had the opportunity to do. That in of itself is going to increase this thing 100-fold.
That's really good. One of the things we always talk about is it's not just sports betting in a lot of these new states. Jacob and I were talking about it. It's mobile casino. We saw in Michigan they passed daily fantasy sports betting, mobile casino, all at the same time. And I know you guys run a very successful mobile casino platform, Jacob. My question is, do you think that you target and use the same type of marketing techniques to attract fantasy customers, mobile casino customers, and sports betting customers, or are each of those, marketing types very much different?
Yeah, I mean, and thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, we were Rush Street Interactive was founded in 2013 to be a U.S.-centric online gaming platform, which was a very crazy idea at the time, and turned out to be a genius stroke in hindsight. For us, and I think it's important for everybody in this room to think about, the top 2 online casino operators in New Jersey right now are DraftKings and FanDuel, and we're, depending on the month, in the top 3, 4, or 5. So it's really important to know that, when we talk about online sports betting, we're really talking also about online casino. The demographics are a bit different. We talked about sports betting demographic. Your casino demographic is going to be, look a little bit more like your brick and mortar casino demographic, which is, slightly more female, a bit older. But there's obviously ultimately a cross sell between, and it obviously helps the economics, the lifetime values tremendously in states where you have both, and we're seeing that obviously in New Jersey, and we're seeing that in our business in Pennsylvania as well.
Baird, what about Morgan and Lewis? Is that, how does it affect you guys, the different types of things, daily fantasy sports versus sports betting versus mobile casino?
Well, we're not directly in the industry, but we love all of that. Anytime somebody's trying to do more and get more involved in sports betting and sports gaming, we're there. And so the more platforms there are, the more medias there are, the better we think it is. It's growing. Obviously, the growth is being slowed by legislation and government because everybody wants the whole pie instead of just slicing out their piece of the pie. That's the biggest impediment right now. So I think what Michigan's doing is great, and I hope that it continues to expand across the nation.
Anything else, Adam?
No, I think you make a great point about Michigan. I think also in terms of New Jersey, I'm not sure that those who saw DraftKings Sportsbook come in as early as they did recognize that it was not long before DraftKings Casino followed right behind that, and you're able to operate out of similar wallets so that you're able to transfer those funds seamlessly back and forth and make the experience one that integrates the customer into everything you're offering. And obviously the brick and mortar casinos with the customer databases they have are going to be able to do that in any state with online casino in terms of cross-selling with sports betting.
You know, as somebody who spent, more than 10 years behind the counter at one of the largest licensed sportsbook operators in the country, CG Technology, I was there when it was Cantor Gaming at the beginning. We saw a lot of venues where you couldn't advertise. You weren't able to advertise sports arenas. I mean, for so long, you weren't able to have any, casino advertisement or sports betting advertisement in these arenas. Now we see venues more and more, not just opening up to the advertising, but opening up to be partners. Do you think that there's still any venues, Baird, especially in your time with the Raiders and the AAF? Are we still seeing any venues really where you can't advertise?
Oh yes, it's actually a lot more prevalent than you think. It is changing, but it's still a horrible problem. And most of the media deals that I've negotiated for these teams that are embracing gaming and gambling, you still are limited as to what you can actually say and broadcast. For example, they don't want to see odds. They don't want to hear anybody talk about odds. They don't want to hear anybody use the word gambling. While at the same time, you're still trying to promote the fact that you have a gambling app that you're trying to lift off. Sure. Colleges are the most difficult. A lot of colleges and universities, ban any sort of advertising or any naming or mentioning of gaming or gambling.
What about you guys, Jacob? You guys still feel that there's venues where you try to advertise in where you still maybe have problems?
Yeah, well, I think one of the great things that happened in the last few months was the opportunity to advertise on Google. I think has made a huge difference, and so that's been tremendous, and I'm sure there's more to come. As it relates to the in-stadium, kind of switching gears, the in-stadium, we're partners with Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia. There's certain things that we're able to do during hockey and not during basketball. So there's things like that we still have to work through. And then as Scott Butera mentioned earlier, in D.C. and in Illinois, you're going to be able to do sports betting in the stadiums, and then in other states, is that going to take hold or not? So it's still just very different, and depends on the state, depends on the sport.
There's this long-standing stigma that that this perception that although the law has now changed, still needs to be undone, and it's going to take some time. And there's a general warming occurring, but it's still very difficult for a lot of folks in this room to advertise the way they want to or get their name out the way they want to in these venues.
So a lot of people said, Nevada obviously had a monopoly in sports betting for so many years, and there was sort of an assumption in the sports betting industry that once PASPA was repealed and sports betting started to spread across the United States, that the numbers in Nevada would start to drop off significantly. Yet in November, we just saw the greatest month ever in the history of November sports betting, and the handles increased year over year since PASPA was repealed. So I guess the question I would ask you guys is, as more and more states, we're now up to 20 with legislation that allows legalized sports betting, as more and more states continue, is each state going to continue to thrive, or is there going to be a tipping point where with so many states, some of these states are going to suffer or have to fight harder for that audience and those bettors?
I think the primary misconception in the early days of U.S. legal sports betting was exactly what you just mentioned, that right here in Las Vegas was going to suffer the most from the expansion to New Jersey and Pennsylvania. When you see $614 million wagered in Nevada in November, that dispels that pretty quickly when you see that they were also great months for New Jersey and for Pennsylvania. To your question directly, is there going to be necessarily a tipping point where it goes back the other way with the supply and the demand? I don't think we're anywhere close to that, if such a thing even exists.
$150 billion was estimated to be wagered illegally last year in the United States. It's potentially a $400 billion market. I think places like Nevada and New Jersey are going to gain tremendously because they're so far ahead of the game. These states are now tripping all over each other trying to figure out how to take advantage of the new decision in Murphy. And they're way behind. I mean, they're years behind, and they're trying to catch up quickly, but there's a lot of impediments and hurdles and people with their hands out. I don't see this area suffering at all.
Yeah, I agree. It's sort of like what poker was in 2004 or 5. Everybody could play poker in their house, and then all of a sudden everybody on the Las Vegas Strip opened up a poker room. So I think it's the same phenomenon.
So what do you guys look at as potentially the biggest growth sector in sports betting? So, I mean, everyone talks about whether it's in-play wagering, whether it's marketing to more female sports. 2020, 2021, 2022, what are going to be the largest growth opportunities in sports betting, in your opinion? And let's start with you, Baird.
For me, and I'm biased because I was involved greatly with the Alliance of American Football, but I think it's play-to-play betting. It's the way we all watch sports anyway. Many of you in this room probably sit there with your buddy for the last 10 years and bet whether or not the next pitch is going to be a ball or a strike. Most of us hate the fact that you have to set your fantasy lineup on Thursday and wait till Monday to figure out if you've won. Play-to-play is how millennials think. It's people like instant gratification, and I see gaming and gambling moving that way, so people can have more bets, be constantly interactive and involved in the game. It's going to change the way people watch sports. The other thing we haven't talked about is wearable tech. Wearable tech is also going to greatly be implemented in sports gambling, so that you can literally see on your monitor whether or not a corner is gassed and a wide receiver is fresh, and bet that wide receiver is going to get the ball in the very next play.
And so many applications for that wearable
Yeah.
tech. I know we have some companies here today that do that, including Shock Tracker, and I love those guys. And that wearable tech has so many applications, including to us from an integrity standpoint. We know, all right, we know this athlete normally runs this fast. Today he's running this fast,
Yep.
which is slower. What outside factor could be causing that? Is it an injury? Is it motivation? Or is it an outside factor such as an integrity
And
issue?
the leagues have had this tech forever, but they've been scared to death to implement it because of the obvious liability. Because then there's the healthcare side of it. What did your team and your doctors know, and when did you know it, based on the wearable tech data you were getting during the game? Should you have known his concussion was bad? Things like that. So I don't mean to dominate.
And the players themselves, too,
Yeah, and
as
the players
far as,
themselves,
hey,
yeah.
Now we really know how fast you're running during a game, and does that affect your ability to get another contract or something like that? And
Exactly.
so I think while there's a lot of obvious player issues with it, that data is very valuable to the sports betting industry, and I think it does, to your point, present a wonderful growth opportunity moving forward. Jacob? Or go ahead, Adam.
No, I think the only thing we didn't touch on within there is in order to get to that point, there are concerns with the players' unions and the privacy of certain data and just how you're aggregating some of that over time. I think beyond what Baird said about in-play, which is obviously an enormous growth opportunity, we can take that a step back, and even though it might be a bit high level, and just make it clear that in-play is about mobile. And in the end, we're talking about being able to wager from your phone, being able to wager from your smart device in any way, shape, or form. And it wouldn't be a panel if we didn't use the word synergy, right? And so we have to talk about the synergy of how the laws and regulations work along with that, how certain states have set it up to where you can register and fund your account right on your phone. Certain states have it set up to where you have to come in person and register for an account, and you can't fund it that way. And I think the more you see those things line up in a way that accepts the know your customer practices and the security of what the industry offers today and lines that up with the opportunity for growth, I think that's one of the bigger things that you're going to see in terms of how this can really blossom over the next few years.
It's interesting you bring that last point up, because I remember, being a part of CG, we were the first ones at Cantor Gaming to launch a mobile sports betting app in the state of Nevada. And at the time, just only having to go to the casino once was thought as a convenience. Now they think of it as an inconvenience in Nevada. Oh, they make you go to a casino once, and it's amazing how far that's become. And I do agree that that's sort of one of the larger growth potentials as well. Jacob?
Yeah, I think one of the important things for people to understand is in Europe, in-game betting is the majority of bets. We're nowhere close to that in the U.S. right now. The only other thing I would add, to that point is, latency is also another issue. I think latency between the time the game's actually happening and then the time people see it on their TV screens and their mobile devices will only go down in the future, and I think that will help this market, the in-play market, pick up as well.
Yeah, that was the biggest hurdle for years, was the technological hurdle for people were seeing it live in the stadium and they were seeing it differently at home. I know, for example, there's an app out there, I shall remain nameless, that has it down to less than a tenth of a second now, from the difference between what you get on your smartphone to what someone's actually seeing live at the game.
Well, don't we agree that the latency issues that existed 10 years ago have increased so dramatically that they're at an all-time low right now in the United States in terms of from when an event actually happens to when you see it at your TV, that latency is at its lowest we've ever been.
Yeah, and we're talking, really, if you're talking matters of seconds, and that's really where we're at, is we're
Correct.
talking about, you mentioned Baird, tenth of a second, and, we're talking about, when we talk about data feeds, the difference between 2 to 3 seconds, and the difference from 4 to 5 seconds, and that can be massive.
Yeah, so let's talk about in-play, because I think it's kind of, the elephant in the room a lot of times in sports betting when people talk about growth. And the numbers they use, they always directly compare them to the European marketplace. But at the end of the day, we're not the European marketplace. The sports are different. The majority of in-play wagering done in Europe is on soccer and tennis. Soccer and tennis combined wouldn't make up 1% of wagering in the United States. So while those two sports may be very accommodating to in-play wagering, nobody scores in tennis matches, there's long lapses of time to put different bets in. Tennis is built where after every point there's a little bit of a break to bet in. It's very much made for that. Outside of baseball, who has that regimented pitch, between inning, the rest of the U.S. sports, basketball, football, hockey, the way we play them with that continuous motion, they aren't as easily, correlated with in-play wagering because there's so much continuous action. So we talk about in-play growth, and I think we all agree that the in-play market's going to continue to grow, but when you look at the European market at 65-70% of wagers are placed in play, I don't think we ever get there in the United States, and I think it's because of the sports that we play aren't as easily correlated to in-play wagering. What are you guys' thoughts on in-play wagering in the United States, and where does it really end up 3 to 5 years from now?
I'll start. Football is the most bet sport in the United States, and football, I think, I got to disagree, lends itself very well to play-to-play. For example, the
no-huddle offense is now...
No huddle's a challenge, but the play clock is crucial to play-to-play betting because the odds change based on formation. The app that we worked on, the Alliance of American Football, the odds would change based on where the formation. If the quarterback then sends the tailback out to the wing, then all of a sudden the whole odds change from a running play to a passing play. I think football is going to do very well play-to-play. I agree basketball is going to be difficult. Baseball's perfectly made for it. Even hockey's difficult. But I think because so many more people bet football in the United States, I think it's going to do just fine.
Jacob, what do you think about the in-play growth in the regulated sports betting market?
I agree with your comment. I think that's why you're seeing, like we talked about earlier. I think that's why you're seeing an explosion. I think tennis and golf are going to be a lot more than 1% of the volume of bets when and that's a trend I don't think is going away.
And I think we can look at what happens right now and see that it is just a tiny fraction of what it can become. Maybe it's not 65 to 70%, but I can tell you that I host 2 nights a week on VSiN where our entire show is dedicated toward in-play betting. We do 4 hours a night on the Green Zone where we are targeted toward the in-play betting market, and we are watching all of the major sports as they evolve for that. And you're right, some are definitely easier than others. The other piece I think to keep in mind with in-play is the education curve in terms of getting people, Jacob mentioned drinking milk and learning how to bet, and I think we're way short of that at the moment. I can tell you a quick anecdote. of having someone walk up to our beautiful VSiN studios right out here at the South Point and knock on the window and want to be able to ask a question. And the question wasn't about how to place an in-play bet. It was, what does the minus mean next to the number, right? And I think once we accept that customer needs to be brought along and helped to understand, and that can be in a lot of different ways, especially in terms of the app technology and making the app technology easier to understand, more accessible. I think what you're seeing on the East Coast right now is going to be the leading edge of what we see throughout the country in terms of how we use technology to bring people along to in-play.
We've heard about how intimidating casinos are to most people and most gamblers that are new to it. There's nothing better than sitting at home on your smartphone and learning this stuff, and that's why this thing is exploding the way it is, because people are now comfortable taking the risk and learning exactly how to bet.
Yeah, and I think we've seen that across every state. When we talked about it earlier, that even with competition, Nevada continues to grow because more and more people are getting educated, getting over that, detriment of walking in and not understanding the board and being able to go at their own pace, learning on their mobile device. Oh, okay, when I type in, I want to wager this amount, it shows me how much I'm going to win, and the comfort level in education's growing. And look, I love in-play betting too. I just don't know that the numbers ever get to where they are in some of the European markets where the sports directly lend themselves more to in-play betting. I wanted to make sure I left a little bit of time for questions, so if anybody has questions for anybody on the panel, I'll have somebody send the mic around. Mr. Patrick Everson in the back. Derek, here you go.
Nice eye.
I know, look at that.
That's pretty impressive.
Excellent discussion. Really appreciate it. I'm curious just to get and you varying backgrounds here, but which is why I'm really more curious about the answers to this question. But with the title of this panel, expanding the sports betting audience, how to expand the sports betting audience, is there room in expanding the sports betting audience in a legal, regulated fashion here in the United States? Will sportsbooks find a way to include more? This is the big complaint I see on Twitter, is that sharp bettors can't get down. So is there room in the market for the sharp bettor, or is everything geared toward people who, like me, were betting Clemson plus 440 when they were down 16-0, who might throw a 2 or 3 team parlay out there that's not really an advantage play, or people who are really fundamentally just completely new to sports betting, and as you noted, millennials, people learning sports, learning more about sports betting. Is that the only way we want to go, or is there a way to? Is there a middle ground?
In terms of the sharp bettors, and I'll just take a first crack at it, Jacob, you may have some very strong opinions on it. And, I know I've never worked in another industry one day since I graduated college. I've worked in sports betting every single day of my career since I graduated college. And I've worked behind the counter for 10 years, and I heard those complaints from the sharp bettors that you're not letting me bet enough. Well, why am I going to let you bet that much on a WNBA second half total where you may have an advantage? At the end of the day, I don't know any business that caters to advantage players who beat them. I mean, blackjack doesn't do it. I mean, I don't know any. So why would sports betting operators suddenly start to cater their business to advantage players who only play when they have an advantage, who cost those operations money? And in terms of, hey, should sports betting operations do more to give to the sharp player? Why? I think sports betting operators should look to increase their audience size, to get new players, to get more women engaged, to get more millennials engaged, rather than to care what the sharp advantage player says when he's trying to bet a second half total on Portland State versus Bethune-Cookman on a Tuesday night because he knows the point guards out and nobody else does. I mean, I think it's one of those situations where, a lot of books, and they give very high limits to players that they know at the end of the year they're going to have a net negative to, and it's only the sharps themselves who have advantages that complain. It's the same thing as guys who have advantages counting cards in blackjack. Why don't you let me count cards? Because we're not in the business of losing money.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
No,
Sorry.
Good answer.
And Matt, I know you've been involved in this a lot, so I certainly respect where you're coming from this, and I understand. I guess what I was saying, and maybe to clarify a little bit, I'm not saying go put yourself in a disadvantage. You're in a business. You're in a business, and a business exists, especially in capitalism, to make a profit. So there's no issue with me on that. And I was simply expressing an opinion that I see expressed a lot, and I'm sure you've seen it too. And I just didn't know if from a bookmaking perspective or from the perspective of just the knowledge that all of you have in this field, if there's a way to do that. If there's not, then I certainly understand. And I guess I should have clarified it that way. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't do anything. You're a business. You should do what works for your business, generally speaking. That's how you stay in business. But is there some wiggle room there or not? And if there isn't, that's fine. That's the answer. But I should probably clarify that a little bit better.
Thankfully, I'm on the other side of the counter now as an integrity operator, so I guess it's more of a question for Jacob, really, as an operator. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to probably answer the question a little bit differently. I mean, when we have people that are having bad days on our site, maybe they're on a losing streak, we'll actually reward them. We'll send them randomly send them a reward. I mean, so for us, I mean, this is a business about acquiring customers for as little as you can, and then retaining them, offering them great customer service, offering them being very transparent with bonusing, being very transparent and quick with cash outs. But no, I mean, we've got to that's really the name of the business. And so, we'll take care of, and obviously offer more to folks that are not doing as well.
You're talking about organic versus inorganic growth here, and I hate to say this, but they're right. The big, uncharted territory out there is inorganic growth here. You want the audience for betting to become younger and less wealthy, and the only way to do that is to expand the way they're doing it right now, is to appeal to that demographic, because it's untapped. They're all at home with their devices. They don't know much about this. And you're talking about a lot of people with a lot of money that would love to know how to do this and just don't have the access. And this access is going to change that.
I think there's probably a longer-term view here, if you're coming from the perspective of the sharp bettor, that the more you increase the pool, the more you enable the bookmaker to spread out the risk, the more opportunity you might have down the line, even if right now does not look like what you were used to 5 years ago.
Yeah. And everything's about liquidity. I mean, you never hear anybody complaining about how much money they're able to wager on an NFL game, or how much money am I able to wager on the Lakers versus Clippers TNT Thursday night game, or how much money am I able to wager on Sunday night baseball. Nobody ever complains about that, because none of the bookmakers ever turn down those folks on anything they want to bet on those games, because there's a ton of liquidity in the pool. It's when you go and you try to bet events that have no liquidity on them for ridiculously outrageous limits, and then when we're in a situation where you have an advantage, and then when the casino doesn't oblige how much they want to wager on a situation, on a market with no liquidity and an event, then that's where you see people outraged on Twitter. But at the end of the day, the sports betting operators are here to service the masses. How do we get new customers? How do we grow sports betting? How do we grow our audience? Not how do we appease that less than 1% of our customers that only come and bet with us when they have an advantage, and when we don't let them bet as much as they want, complain on social media.
So people are being limited in even the biggest, most liquid markets, okay? And it's because those markets right now are being served not necessarily by the Nevada operator that maybe you've worked behind the counter for the last 10 years. They're being served by B2B operations from Stockholm, or they're being served by B2B or B2C operations from the UK that does not have an American style of betting and only has one way of operating, and that is limiting players, whether they are big stakes bettors or small stakes bettors, who are successful. And I think one of the problems is the short-term thing is that every sharp bettor is a bettor who's betting 10 to 20 dimes a game on a side or a total, when there are sharp bettors who are being limited who, and we know, and we see this in New Jersey, who are being limited because they're sharp at $100 or $200. And then suddenly they're trying to get down at an operator and they're limited to, or have to have an executive decision made about a $25 bet on a side or a total in exactly those markets that you're talking about.
Well, maybe they should shop around for their operators then, because we see some wonderful operators. I mean, the same ones here as in Nevada. MGM Properties owns a, you see the big bets posted by the folks on MGM all the time. And, at some point, first of all, there has to be a limit to people's risk tolerance, no matter how big your company is. Different operators have different risk tolerances. But, I guess if you're not happy with the limits at your operator, shop around. Shop around for a different operator.
Everybody's using Candee.
But everybody isn't using Candee.
But if that's largely the market, then
I think there's still a lot of diversity in the market right now. Think of how many big operators there are. MGM, William Hill, FanDuel, DraftKings, Coast Properties. There's a lot of diversity in the market right now. I understand your point there. If there isn't any diversity in the marketplace, and then the players that want to wager for higher levels because they're winning aren't able to get down the liquidity than they want, then there may be a legit complaint there, and there's not a lot they could do about it. But I think right now there is a lot of diversity in the marketplace. Which marketplace are you saying doesn't have a lot of diversity?
what? New Jersey, Pennsylvania.
New Jersey doesn't have a lot of
All those
diversity?
operators that you just talked about are all operators that have a history of limiting. I'm not talking about like the Spankies of the world or the Rufus Peabodys, but like the John Q. Public guys who they're successful on a couple of $100 and $200 bets and they get limited. And William Hill has obviously a well-known reputation on the street that, hey, look, if you win a couple of bets in a row with these guys, you're going to get limited, okay? I mean, it's really sad state of affairs. I've been limited by William Hill in 3 different states, and I'm not much of an advantage player.
You must be doing pretty good.
No, I wish I was doing better.
Get this guy a panel.
Yeah.
But
what's that?
the irony
Maybe
of
you
this,
should be up
well,
here.
no, definitely not. The irony of this is that a lot of these numbers that have been quoted in the marketplace to state legislators and everything like that to say like, hey, look, this is the potential in the marketplace. This is your potential handle. This is what you expect to earn from the marketplace. But at least a third of that money is being driven by high stakes players and sharp players who aren't necessarily the same thing, and they don't really have a
Hold
home.
on. Are you saying that a third of the handle at a large sportsbook operator is being driven by sharp players?
No. I
Oh.
said at least a third of the potential handle. When you see these market projections that people have made over the course of the last 2-3 years, and we've done some of them, so we're guilty of this as well. When we're saying that X state is potentially worth this much in handle, that's taking all of the handle into account. But if market operators and their suppliers are only tapping that part of the market that is the high churn, really expensive, low stakes player, and there isn't a home for these guys who say like, hey, look, I want to bet 10,000 aside, but nobody's going to let me do it here. Does that mean you still want me to bet offshore? And there isn't enough choice for these guys onshore to be able to say like, okay, yeah, I want to go to this licensed operator or this licensed
I can tell you that
provider.
I don't want you to bet offshore. Stay legal, my friend.
But
Regulated sports
you
betting
say
across
that.
America.
I want you to stay legal, but at the same time, you also said, hey, but if you're a sharp player, I don't feel obligated to give you action. So I get it. It's a catch-22. Nobody's in here. Nobody got into this business to be St. Francis and hand out $10,000 checks to sharp players, but I think the market right now is much more limited than what people are recognizing here.
Yeah, look, I no longer work for operators, so that's probably more of a question for Jacob. Do you want to discuss limits? I know it's a sensitive topic.
I'd rather stay out of it.
No. The long answer is no.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll
Any questions not about wagering limits?
Yeah, I'll throw
Sharps?
the next one out here. So one question is, and probably back to Jacob again, in terms of dealing with multiple different states and how the regulators and the different municipalities act differently would be an interesting feedback to hear from you in terms of your experiences.
I mean, I think it's actually somewhat of has been an advantage for us in some ways because we do own our own proprietary platform. We're privately owned. very nimble and scrappy. We've been able to launch first in Pennsylvania, first in Indiana, because we're willing to roll up our sleeves and work with regulators and do what has to be done to get up and running. And I think that's been really good for us to get the first crack at customers in a state. It's really the history of the casino industry. Every state's different. You learn to work within the confines of the market.
It's also an incredible opportunity for people like this guy right now because they can embed themselves with legislatures and help drive kind of how it's going to look in each state. And it's an unbelievable opportunity. It's literally the Wild West all over again. I represent a lot of these companies that are starting to take on that role because they have the opportunity to shape the market.
All right, we have time for one, maybe two more. All right, guys, he's closer.
Speaking of Pennsylvania, Matt, outlined the narrow margins in sports betting, and then he didn't even mention splitting it with your partners who are doing your technology. But in Pennsylvania, the tax rate is so high, the license fee is so high. How do you make money in Pennsylvania? And because it's doing so well in terms of the volume that's going there, aren't you afraid that what has happened in Pennsylvania is going to spread to some of these other states that are currently legalizing sports betting?
The way I would answer that is I'd say, what I think has been positive is really every other state out there is adopting more in the 10 to 15% range for sports betting. So I think we, obviously speaking from our hope is that most states continue at the 10 to 15%. Pennsylvania, you have the ability to obviously cross sell to the casino, and you do have some lower rates on table games. We're by far the leader in table games in Pennsylvania, but I mean, in short, I think what we're seeing is that Pennsylvania is not the model being adopted by most other states in terms of the tax rate.
I mean, we track legislation across the country. It's what we do, and there is not another state that has come within 15% of what Pennsylvania has proposed and enacted with an effective 36% tax rate and a $10 million license fee. I mean, that license fee has been replicated in Illinois and other places, but the highest we've seen other than that is 20% in Tennessee and in Illinois, and none of the legislation we've seen proposed coming up for 2020 comes anywhere near what Pennsylvania has chosen to do.
And again, capitalism is king here. The best way to correct these markets is competition. And the more and more states that come online, the more and more opportunity customers have to drive out of Kansas and go into Missouri or out of New Jersey and then into New York. It's going to really drive these things down. I mean, these states that have come out right now, they were ahead of the game. They're kind of getting the lion's share, but it's going to change, and they're going to face pressure to change.
All right, we got 2 minutes left. We have one more question over here.
What are you guys' thoughts on kind of with the millennial and the mobile adoption that's happening on some of the less orthodox methods of bringing people into this realm through like gamification of the content, free to play, perhaps other type of mechanics like pools and things like that, which are quite easily executable on mobile and may not be a direct lead to kind of all the stuff that we're talking about here, but maybe it's a 2 or 3 step process, and that might be the first step for some of those audiences?
I'll start that. For example, the Alliance of American Football, although the league is now defunct, the IP related to its app was purchased out of bankruptcy by MGM, so it's still being developed and utilized. And the thing they did was they made it free to play, so that you could learn it. It was a game first, and then you could choose betting optionality down the line if you wanted to. So what they do is they bring the opportunity to you, so there's no risk. You kind of get hooked on it, you like it, and you're like, I'm actually pretty good at this. I might as well try to make some money off of it. So I think that's going to be the hook. And again, it appeals greatly to millennials and young people in general.
Yeah, our casino for fun is on the same exact platform as our real money casino. So, we can offer them casino for fun, and then when the state goes live, convert them to real money. But we do tons of things on gamification. We offer free free bingo games, free wheel spins. We really gamify the way we offer bonuses, and we do a lot of things that we think are catering the exact market you're talking about.
Yeah, keep in mind, we're talking about less than 30% of the country right now, less than 15 states that have the ability to bet, yet you can turn on a Fox broadcast on a weekend and see free-to-play games advertised. You're building a database that you can activate later. You can also look at daily fantasy sports and a little bit of the resurgence of DFS now as these larger operators realizing that you can continue to build the database of young people who are used to playing on their phone, whether it's gamification of content like Jacob's saying, or just the simple bracket challenge that people have been a part of for a long time.